safely in my pocket.
I understand. Okay, good.
I kept it safely in my pocket so that I don't forget and shake hands.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Good. Sarah. And Ganesh should be online. Is the online working? Okay. Okay, sorry, let me get my notes. I suggest that start with Ganesh, then with Thomas. Yeah. Then with Nico, and then with Ruben. After, not me. Yeah? So I think I understood you have seen the question, so I think I'm not asking the question. But if, okay, no. I'll stay where we are. Good. I said plans and finance, scale and organization. Good afternoon. I think we are rushing a little bit from one session to the other. We have a very interesting topic, so people who are starting to leave, maybe they better stay. Okay, let us start, and let me give you a bit of framing of what the discussion is going to be in the coming 45 minutes we have. As I said in the previous session, we need to transform the way in which we are producing, distributing, and consuming our food, and that we are using our land. And that farming systems and value chains, they are the cause of climate change. They are affected by climate change, but they are also part of the solution of climate change. And when we discuss farming systems, if we discuss value chains, we limit ourselves often to policies, to agricultural technologies, about extension. Hardly we talk about energy, which is used within the value chain. And I'm very happy that this afternoon we are looking at what does it mean if we are integrating sustainable energy options in farming systems to make the change to a more sustainable and a more equitable food system. And we know that if you talk about food systems here in Africa or in Asia, that the actual contribution of the low intensive systems is relatively low. But still, I think mitigation is important because we have to start with a transformation process. So whenever we can, already we can work on mitigation, even in low intensive systems. But more important and more urgent is adaptation, because the farming systems are confronted on a day-to-day basis with climate change. And I think, and I hope, our esteemed panel will give us practical examples that sustainable energy is essential for making that those short-term adaptation measures. So in this session, I think we seek to look at practical examples. What works, what are the conditions, how to really facilitate integrating sustainable energy solutions, sustainable energy options within farming systems. So allow me to introduce our very experienced panel here. We have Maria from Arena. We have Nico Jansen from the IKEA Foundation. We have Thomas Pullenkaf from Climate Action Network. And I hope we have Ganesh Neelam online from the Collective for Integrating Livelihood and Initiatives. Welcome, Ganesh. Great. And we have Sarah Alexander from my SNV, so to say. Okay. I'm very looking forward to this short panel discussion, and I hope we have some time for some questions and answer. Let me start with Ganesh. Ganesh, what are your learnings and where should we pay attention to when we talking about energy interventions, and which type of energy interventions make sense for agricultural value chains?
Thanks a lot. And firstly, thanks for inviting us for this discussion. It's going to be a learning discussion for us as well. To share our experiences of working, I just wanted to share one slide with all of you, if you can permit. I'll just put that on the screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
So I just wanted to put this slide to put the context together on how renewable energy is an important enabler in the agriculture value chain. But along with renewable energy, how do you also need to look at the other important enablers to see that the ecosystem grows, the agriculture ecosystem grows from a sustainability perspective as well. And that's what this diagram is trying to show, is how are you ensuring that the community, mainly the small and marginal farmers in this case, you're bringing them together, you are empowering them towards taking up high value agriculture or the value chains in a systematic manner through a very strong and robust planning process. Their ownership uh, towards this whole thing. Along with that, how are you also ensuring quality technologies related to inputs, quality technology related to crop management, which is related in the pre-production, the production, and the post-production stages. Now, renewable energy then comes as an important enabler in each of these layers of the value chain, be it at the pre-production stage, which is mostly from a soil health perspective that one is looking at. During the production, again, it comes as an important enabler for looking at the irrigation aspect. So one is to extract water, but the second is also to look at the water management. So how do you combine both of them together in this overall ecosystem? And finally, when the harvest is out, how are you also looking at energy, mainly the renewable energy resources, to look at the harvest going to the market, as well as if the harvest has to be kept at the farmer's place or at the institution's place, at the community institution's place, then how are you looking at it from a storage perspective also? So all these elements from renewable energy play an important role. But as I said, renewable energy is one of the key enablers from a value chain perspective. How are you also looking at capacitating? You are ensuring that there are other related technologies vis-a-vis agriculture value chain. And most importantly, how are you also strengthening the institutions to take this from a business perspective on a long-term level? So that's what we are trying to show this through this diagram over here. And finally, this all leads to irreversibility, sustainability, and also a level of aspiration that small and marginal farmers can achieve. So that's broadly what I would try to put across from the experience that we are having with the small and marginal farmers in India, the tribal geographies of India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ganesh, for this very nice and complicated overview, which shows that farming systems are actually complex. May I ask you to provide us one example, concrete example of one specific agri-value chain where you have successfully been introducing and scaling sustainable energy solutions?
Yeah. So for example, the work that we are doing, this is a program called Sustain Plus. We are doing it in partnership with IKEA Foundation. So what we are doing under Sustain Plus, and you take the value chain of vegetables, mainly bitter gourd as a value chain. Now in the bitter gourd value chain, what we are basically doing is looking at, as I said, in the pre-production stage, before the breeder gourd has to go into the transplanting mode, you are enabling a polyhouse nursery, a local entrepreneur from the community who's basically growing the nursery, healthy seedling in this case, in the nursery. That nursery healthy seedling is then taken by a small and marginal farmer and transplanted into the field. Now, when you're transplanting it into a field, you are ensuring that the water management practices, the drip irrigation, along with an irrigation asset. And that's where we are integrating renewable energy, the solar irrigation system in this case, along with the drip. So you're also trying to ensure that the irrigation system, which is a solar irrigation system, is something which is also looking at a water management connection, not a flood irrigation, but you're connecting it with the water management system. And that's where you're also enabling the efficiency, the pressure, and other aspects from a solar irrigation system in this case. So while we are doing this as part of the bitter gourd value chain, so you're looking at the irrigation happening. Then finally, when the produce is coming out, what we are also seeing, the produce, as we were talking in the earlier session also, the produce also has a market variability. Now in that market variability, when you're getting a lower price, the farmer needs some mechanism to store. So we are also integrating the decentralized cold storage mechanism at a farmer producer organization level. So this is all happening in a decentralized production hub manner, looking at a bitter gourd value chain or a tomato value chain or any other agriculture or vegetable related value chains that we are focusing on. And this is something that we are doing at a certain scale with more than 100,000 small and marginal farmers in the tribal areas of central India. So that is something which is practically happening on the ground from our side. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I think that's a very good example, which also shows that it is scalable.
Yes.
In the practice, we see that affordability of introducing sustainable energy solutions is always a problem. Is sometimes a problem. And I want to go to you, Thomas. Um, there is quite some struggle to see what kind of financial models are actually working to support SMEs or even support end users to introduce sustainable energy solutions. Could you share some experiences of financial models which, in your view, are appropriate and which are working in practice?
Thank you, Andre. Now, I think the the crux of it is affordability, because the crux of the whole thing is affordability, because very often we tend to confuse between should I remove my mask? It's okay. I'm audible. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So, the crux of it is affordability, because very often what happens is that we confuse high cost with affordability. And I think they're totally two different topics. High costs are a part of owning any asset is a high cost issue. Now, it need not be an energy system for a rural farmer and need not be an energy intervention in a value chain. High costs are associated with any asset. Let's forget energy and value chains and all that and talk about houses. Let's say if, I don't think any of us can really go out and say that, okay, I'm going to buy my home using the money that is lying in my bank account. I don't think any of us can really afford to do that. But then, what do? We go to a financial institution and we tell the financial institution, look, I intend to buy a house and give me the package that you are there. And the financial institution in turn asks you for what is your age, what is your earning capacity right now, how many more years do you have, of working life, what are your bank balances, what other assets you have. And based on this whole thing, the financial institution sort of decides on saying that, okay, this is the amount of money that can be given to you. And that is given to you for a number of years. For example, if I were to go at my age right now, they would say, okay, you've got another 10 years more of useful life. So the maximum loan period can be 10 years. And based on that, they would then give me a product which is 10 years long at affordable interest rates and say, okay, this is what can be financed. And I think that is the key for creating financial models for asset ownership, even in the case of the farmers. We often tend to confuse the requirements of farmers as short-term financing, while our cars and our houses and any assets that we purchase are always on long-term financing. So if we can create financial models that match, like they did for the housing, that can match the income of the farmer, that it can be assured by the asset itself, or in many cases, for example, in India, when you take a home loan, they ask you to insure your life and keep the bank as the beneficiary as long as the loan is not paid. Now you can even do that, create insurance products around the asset, so that this affordability challenge for the farmer is crossed. So there's no rocket science in creating models for financial models for asset ownership. It's just taking asset ownership or asset financing as it is and taking it to the end user and keeping it.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's a clear message. Maybe go one step deeper into practice. We are looking at sustainable energy solutions to increase the resilience of agri value chains. Can you share with the audience one example of where you think sustainable energy solution has actually increased the resilience of an agri value chain?
Sure. I think since we are speaking in the background of COP, we also need to talk about the GHG emissions that comes out. And agri-food systems, as Andre was saying in the beginning, is one of those areas that has got the most significant impact as far as GHG emissions are concerned. But having said that, I also think, especially when we are currently going through the food crisis that's happening around the world and the energy crisis that's happening, I don't think we can really afford to say that, okay, let's push back on the agri output. So we really want agri outputs to increase. We really want farmers to create more food, so that this challenge of high costs of food is coming down. And I think that's where renewable energy can play a significant role in building, both on one side, building resilience as far as the farmers are concerned, so that there's more produce coming out, there's more income for them, and on the other side also ensuring that what the additionality that we are going to put in as far as more food on the table is concerned is not going to really affect our climate as well. Now going to this example of a particular value chain, and I think let me take the paddy value chain, and let me take my state in India, Kerala, as an example. Now what used to happen when we were young is that the monsoon in Kerala always hit the Kerala coast on the 1st of June. It was inevitable that on the 1st of June the monsoon would not hit. Give 1 day, 2 days on the other side. So it must be by 31st of May or by the 2nd of June. And the entire paddy cropping cycle is planned based on the monsoon hitting the southern coast. Now what has happened after climate change and in the recent times is that the monsoon has become very unpredictable. And because the monsoon has become unpredictable, a lot of activities that went around creating, preparing the nursery, creating the samples, transplanting of these samples, planting it in the field have all gone haywire. So now a lot of the farmers really require to go in for irrigation for what was once a rain-fed area. And these smallholder farmers, who are a majority of the farmers in that area, have no option but irrigate their fields using diesel gensets. And that's definitely not something that is going to help the climate or help them financially as well. So in putting in small irrigation pumps into that area where they can actually create the saplings and keep everything ready, and also ensure that there is enough of water and the saplings don't dry out before the monsoon hits, is one thing that can be done.
Yes, very concrete example, and for a very important crop for a large country. Yeah? So I think that's also a good example of let's say a scalable introduction of sustainable energy. I think most of us are working still in projects and in programs. So I think it's important that we also look at what is a correct program design, so that we can ensure that energy solutions are integrated into agri value chains. So Sarah, since you are involved, engaged in a number of these programs. Can you share a little bit of your experiences on what we
Yeah.
need to do or what we don't need to do to make sure that that is happening?
Sure, thanks, Andre. I mean, like, I think unfortunately when we talk of energy many times, it tends to be with a very technology-centric connotation or focus. And I think that's a sort of a disservice to the energy kind of narrative in many ways. As Ganesh ji very eloquently put, and Thomas as well, I think, we have to think of the context in which a lot of these interventions, energy interventions, are coming in. I think it will be disastrous not to think of things like, the kind of inputs or backward linkages or market linkages that need to be there, the sort of local supply chains, what is the sort of infrastructure that is required there, what is the kind of financing available to the end user. If we do not have a handle on what those sort of preconditions are, I think it would be disastrous to sort of introduce any kind of energy intervention in that mix. So it needs to be sort of in constellation or in tandem with all these different sort of conditions. The value chain approach, I think, is the beauty of that in my mind is because it's able to break down fairly complex agri-food systems or value chains into into phases or stages where you can clearly see where energy can come in and play a role. It can also help you identify certain partners that you need to kind of have in the mix at different levels. And so in the end, you have a whole of system interventions that can kind of take place right from inputs to processing or retail. So I'll illustrate this with an example. Like if I just take the dairy value chain, for example, right from inputs where we see, there are a lot of issues on depletion of fodder, the quality of the input, there is a lot of experimentation being done around solar-powered hydroponics as a solution there. When we come to sort of the production side of things, there is experimentations around milking machines that are being looked at to improve the rate at which milking can happen, the hygienic part of it. So that's another area there. And then from the collection side, around sort of cooling machines that can kind of cool some of the milking solutions that are there, and therefore increase or give you more flexibility on the pricing of these end products. Now, when it comes to the processing, I'll illustrate this with an example in one of our programs for smallholder farmers in dairy and horticulture, also funded by IKEA Foundation. There we there was a women's cooperative group that was working to enhance or introduce yogurt processing into as an added revenue or value chain. Now, there were already, with our agri-food colleagues, there was a program that was being developed with them on improved production, branding, and marketing. What the energy team came in and did is you already had this foundation. So they came in identifying a good technical service provider with a good after-sales service who can then introduce a fridge, a 150-liter fridge, to basically help them save or, cool this yogurt that they're producing. Previously, they were just making batches for a very short period of time and only on order. Now they're able to sort of look at this a little bit more broadly. They're able to kind of, sell to different people. They're taking bulk orders. They're even looking at expanding their system. So the foundation of it was laid by the agri-food side, and I think the energy comes in as an added value. So that's an example of that.
Okay, so I think that's a very good, let's say, add-on growing example. I think I talked about scalability, what we want, but at the same time we also want sustainability. So we want to make sure that that there is a kind of ecosystem to really introduce sustainable energy solutions, which means that we need, let's say, local supply of sustainable energy solutions. What can we do, or what should we do in order to facilitate that creation of such an ecosystem, that we can get local supply, after sales service, etc., for sustainable energy solutions? Can you give a few examples of what we should do? What are the priorities?
Sure. I think, definitely one thing that I think needs to be done a lot more is I think there's a dearth of, and I say this, incubation or acceleration services that support technology developers, for instance, to really develop this low energy consuming agri innovations. I don't think that there are enough players in this, and I don't think that there are enough local incubation services or accelerator services doing this. And that is, I think, when you don't have that, there's always going to be, there are just too few people looking at this. It's already a complex agri-food system space. So I think, those kinds of last mile incubation kind of systems need to be in place. Now, to match that, this continuum of capital, right, that we all talk about, there is a bottleneck in the kind of early stage or high risk R&D that is required. I think IKEA Foundation is one of the few players, I think, in that who's really sort of, throwing their hat in the ring to really give that flexibility to be able to, have this sort of high-risk monies. But I think there's a dearth of that for this early-stage technology developers, as well as you go further down that continuum, even the kind of risk appetite gets, further and further lowered. But I think we need to be looking at better sort of investment opportunities there. On the demand side of that capital continuum, I think more experimentation around end-use payment models, and I think Thomas alluded to that as well. I think unless we crack that nut, again, as much of capital you pump into the companies, you're always going to come back to this problem of end-user affordability. So the capital continuum with that. And then I think the last point that I would add to that is, I think a lot of companies need to, or supply chain or whatever, I think you need to converge with agri-food programs and partners. Unfortunately, what will end up happening is a lot of the local companies end up trying to do things or trying to do these backward and market linkages and things like that actually the agri players are better off doing. So I think some sort of convergence with these kinds of programs that already exist and that there is a foundation laid, I think will help speed up the scale up, like even partners like Cine who are already in the agriculture space, and you converge with partners like that. I think that is a more fruitful kind of partnership than trying to go in as an energy company and do everything yourself.
Great. I think you are talking about add-on, you're talking about integration, and I think we see both on the donor side, but also on the implementing side, on the organizational side, that we are still quite siloed. We have energy projects, we have agri-food projects. Let me turn to you, Nico, as a representative of one of the donors. What do you think you can do, let's say, from your donor's perspective, to facilitate much more that integration, that add-on between agri-food, transformation of value chains, and introducing sustainable energy solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Andre, and thank other panelists for some of the credits you've given us as a funder. Let me go back to September last year when the UN Food Systems Summit was. I think there was a great call there for radical forms of collaboration, and I think that's what it's all about. And breaking down silos, in the first place, I think starts with awareness that you are in a silo. And that's also a willingness to get out of your silos. And we can only do that through dialogue, internally in our own organizations and institutions, but also, of course, through partnerships by bringing partners together. Concretely, we did it last August in Kenya, where we brought our energy and our ag partners together and simply went on a road trip. We just went traveling together for 3-4 days, visiting each other's projects and learning from needs, from technologies, and start to talk with the farmers and the providers of energy. What would make it work for you? So we came across fantastic examples of young people getting interested again in agriculture because they have access to technology, solar irrigation, but not just the technology as such, but also how the technology was brought, with pay-as-you-go systems, with technology monitoring systems, that if there is a problem with the system, you get your service to come and fix it. instead of just having to wait for somebody to come from the capital city 3 days away. They can help you even by phone sometimes, to reset your system or whatever. So we need to really think across all these silos to come up with the right solutions. And these are solutions in productivity, to boost productivity. Sub-Saharan Africa is still importing $50 billion a year in food. That shouldn't be necessary. And with getting out of our silos and smart investments, we can find the right ways to boost productivity. But also, I think, as Sarah is mentioning, with reducing food losses. 30% of our food never gets consumed. Why? Because we don't have enough energy in the agriculture sector to preserve it properly. I learned earlier this week that in Sub-Saharan Africa, the average households have the same amount of energy as us having a fridge in the north. That's the average energy poverty we're talking about. We need to address that. So it's not just the technology, it's the systems that need to be in place to provide it and to make it possible to use it. And I think we can go on and on and on about that. But the solutions are there, but it starts with willingness to address it and to indeed get out of our silos and start to talk with each other across domains.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are all on the same page there. I think that we want that it is needed, and I think we really have to collaborate jointly to really make that work in practice. I think the panelists also talked about that local ecosystem. So building the capacity as localized and contextualized as possible. What do you see as need for, let's say, direct support of local organization, local SMEs? Do you see a role for yourself as a donor to directly support resource flows to more local organizations, or are you quite okay with the way you are currently funding your sustainable energy programs?
Yeah, thanks for that. And no, definitely there is a need to keep investing in local organizations. Local institutions, local capacity needs to be there on the ground. And through a number of programs and partnerships, we do that, of course. And that can be programs with also national universities to change the way they educate, with local partners like yourself, but also with local partners like a 1 Acre Fund who blend finance with services to make it all much closer to the users in the end who need the solution. Because we can come in from Europe whatever we want, but in the end we disappear again. And then the system has to maintain itself. And local civil society needs to be there to raise a critical voice towards finance, towards business, towards their own governments as well, to get the system organized and to make the system work for them and not the other way around.
Correct. Some of the panelists mentioned already policies a number of times to create, to facilitate some of these processes we actually all want. We know that changing policies is quite a hard nut to crack. Miriam, can you share a little bit some experiences of what you think policy pushes, or what kind of policy priorities do you think are needed for creating that integration which we all long for?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I work for the International Renewable Energy Agency, and our mandate is to work with countries on accelerating their energy transitions, and particularly renewable energy deployment. But of course, energy is not an end in itself, but it's what people can do with the energy. And so we have been looking at the energy agriculture nexus, and have been also looking at the different policies that exist, where we see what type of policies are needed. And so I want to share a few kind of insights that we have from this analysis that we've done together with partners. One thing, as with most challenges, financing is an issue. So we need dedicated policies that target the energy agriculture nexus, and it's important that they kind of provide an incentive structure to advance renewable energy in agriculture, such as subsidies, fiscal incentives. It's also important, because it is a nexus issue, that we look at the roles and responsibilities of different actors, make sure that they work in an integrated manner. And one of the policies that have also shown to be effective is to have lending quotas for domestic financial institutions. We have seen that there are an increasing number of countries that are putting in place dedicated policies, including in the Philippines, in Ethiopia, in India. And then the second point, like, as we look at policy design, it's important that policies take a nexus design approach, and that, for instance, like if we deploy more solar irrigation pumps, it's important to also think about water efficiency, because as we solve an energy problem, we don't want to create a water problem. So, and then maybe the final point is that obviously energy is only one of the inputs. We need a broader set of interventions. So if a farmer has like a higher yield because of solar irrigation pumps, there are questions around infrastructure, processing, ensuring storage, and making sure that they can benefit from this potential additional income. And then I also want to echo what Sarah said. Like, I mean, ultimately, it's not about the technology itself. It's about the ecosystems that we build, and that is something that we also need to consider in policy design.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about integration. You mentioned a few examples which on policy level can facilitate that. On the other hand, at the implementation side, we also need partnerships. We need different expertises in a partnership to realize that integration of sustainable energy solutions within agri-value chains. Can you share a few examples of, let's say, partnerships which you think are working, and maybe you even give a few recommendations to the audience? What kind of partnership do you think are needed to really facilitate that process?
Yeah, so in terms of like the work that Irina is doing beyond kind of looking at policies, we've also started working with governments and with different partners on energy assessments for specific value chains. And one thing that we've noticed is that value chains, even for the same agri-commodity, can be very differently structured depending on the varying capacities of the market. So we need to mobilize different stakeholders, make sure that these solutions are tailored, and that includes stakeholders both from the energy and agriculture sectors, including enterprises, farmers, community groups, and then also more broadly, as mentioned, because, as previously mentioned, because skills are important. So like making sure that we have these like very broad partnerships that take into account the very specific local context. Then on the national and regional level, we need to mobilize, like again, we've heard about silos, first the recognition that we are in silos, but then also push to get out of these silos, to put these dedicated policies in place. And then maybe finally at the global level, we have a lot of different international institutions, and to make sure that, again, we work together and find these synergies in our work. And at Irina, like, we've been working with different partners, including FAO and others. And it's great also to be here in the Food System Pavilion as like someone coming from the energy space. So thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
Next time we will present something in the
Oh, please do.
in the FDC 7 pavilion.
We have a pavilion. We definitely should do that next time.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I think we still have time for a few questions from the audience to our distinguished panel. Are there any burning questions for our panel?
Hi, my name is Gloria. I'm with One Acre Fund. One of the programs that we've been expanding on quite a bit is agroforestry. And as much as the farmers have been engaging in it, ultimately you all are very well aware of, when the need is great, they will end up chopping it for charcoal or firewood, especially now since the costs have increased for energy and therefore it's becoming an even greater challenge for the farmers. And so if you're looking at communities such as in sub-Saharan Africa where it's very difficult for them to have access to other kinds of energy solutions, what are some of the solutions that you have seen that we could try to test with farmers who basically live on less than $1 a day?
Thank you very much for a very concrete question. Who wants to shed some light? Nico, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. And indeed, I think we have to separate energy needs in that sense between cooking energy needs and household needs and larger process needs in that sense. And I think, well, SNV is a beautiful example of that in a way with for instance, domestic biogas programs, where integrated livestock remains an important part also of food system solutions, where households can then indeed use, well, basically the waste of a cow or a pig to produce energy, which helps them get away from the need of chopping down trees and making charcoal and degrading their own systems. But again, this is getting out of silos. That's not an energy world. It's not an ag world. It's a food system world. So we have to uplift that out of our silos again and think about the double benefits of these systems.
Thank you, Nico. Anyone to add to this? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think that I think they're just to build on what Nico said, I think that there are plenty of, I feel examples of this sort of experimentation happening in different places. I think we spoke of paddy and dairy and, different kinds of examples. So I think, the fact that some of this stuff needs to bubble up and, be more accessible and for more people to be aware of some of these solutions, I think we just need to have more implementation, more projects on the ground to sort of prove this. I think, unfortunately, right now what's happening is there's, I think, theory and talk about it, but then we need to have this really on the ground up and moving. So the more, I think, examples we have, the more that we can sort of, really demonstrate to a lot of farmers that, these solutions are possible.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask one question myself. I'm actually moderating, so I have the liberty to do that. We see that in more marginal areas, it is relatively more difficult to really develop agri value chains, getting actors together. Do you see that, let's say, sustainable energy solutions, decentralized sustainable energy solutions, can really spur or facilitate agri value chain development in, let's say, more marginal, more fragile areas? Do you see that could be a major component of let's say going into food security in more marginal areas?
I'll just take an example of a very recent
please make it as concrete as possible.
When I was in, very recently, in fact, I was on an IRENA project in Uganda, where we went and spoke to a very small farming community and sort of, tried to understand what was their problem, because they kept saying that, farming is not lucrative. We are all moving to Kampala and we really want to work as labor in Kampala. In fact, they said they want to become boda drivers, which according to me was the worst possible, especially in Kampala. But then what we basically understood was that the challenge was they had a lot of horticultural produce that could be exported, but unfortunately a lot of it got wasted at the village level because of the fact that there was nobody to take it and go. Yeah. So there was this one company that would come once a week, and this one company that came in once a week, they did not have enough of produce to come in every day, while the produce of these farmers came in small trickles across the entire week. And it was becoming a big challenge for them, and because of which they were not able to export. So we said, why don't you just put a cold storage in your village? You can store the vegetable over a week. And they said, okay, we've got two problems with cold storages. One is that none of us can afford a cold storage. And the second is the fact that there's no power in the village. So where are we going to put up a cold storage in the village? So we said, look, there are two things that you can do is come together as a community, create a sort of, they had what was called a village, I think it was Loan and Saving Association. It was called the VLSA, which basically was there as the organizer. We said, why don't you guys get together and invest in a system, and then it can be charged on a use for service basis. So whenever people use the cold storage, they pay for the charges. The system is owned by by this association, and this service can be provided wherein you can store the produce over a week, and it also makes sense for the exporting company to then come send one truck once a week, pick up the material and go back. And it's a practical solution, but every single solution is very different. We will have to really go on a case by case basis, especially when we are talking of small and marginal farmers for whom the challenges are on a daily basis. Incomes are, it's the first crisis that comes in is the requirement for the income. And they're getting them to start thinking of renewable energy and things of that. But end of the day, I think there is a lot of value that can be added to their lives. It's just a question of how do we bring it in, bring in the technology, bring in the, the financing, bring in the institutional building, bring in the, all these aspects of what we call the ecosystem that needs to be in place to ensure that the technology can be used. I think, the challenge is as he said, we think in silos. We need to think beyond silos and say, okay, can we really say that, okay, all these aspects need to go in to create a...
Thank you very much. I think, Nico, you wanted to add something, or?
Yeah, no, I think also related to the earlier question, I think also where we as funders can do a lot better is to create space for learning. We've all been driven by numbers. I think we also have to reflect upon how do we learn together as ecosystems, because we can learn it shows here already in the panel. We can learn so much from each other that we sometimes just need to take time for that and sit down and learn from each other instead of repeating the same mistakes all over again.
Exactly. Very wise words, which are close to my heart, Nico. I think learning is so important, also within our organization and between the partners in which we actually work with. I think we are getting close towards the end of this session, and I really want to thank my distinguished panelists for this discussion. Even time is over, but allow me just to say. Three or four key messages before we part. I think breaking the silos, both from the side of implementers, both from the side of the donors, to really integrate sustainable energy into agri-food system, for me is so essential if you want to realize that transformation we are all looking for. We may need to go for unusual suspects to create coalitions. We don't go for, let's say, the partners we normally work with. I think we have to look at connections between financial institutions, between agricultural extension, between business support to SMEs, for instance. So I think that's another important lesson which I take away. The technology is alone is not enough, and I've been talking about the 3 A's, about affordability. We talk about availability and about appropriateness of the solutions, fit for purpose, contextualized, and I think that is so important. And definitely, last but not least, that we need policies, and we need cross-cutting policies, because often in the countries we are dealing with the Ministry of Agriculture or we are dealing with the Ministry of Energy, but basically you need joint policy and decision making, and I think that is something we as implementers also have to facilitate and push. And again, voice is needed there. I think that are my key takeaways. I want to thank all of you for a very lively discussion. I wish we could continue a little bit more. But I think we have taken away quite some important messages here. Thank you very much, and I would like to close the sessions by now.
Thank you.